people discovered that the stray cat was always waiting in front of the dead man's door. The truth behind it moved everyone. Why would a seemingly ordinary stray cat guard a dead man's door with such unwavering devotion? While the neighbors saw loyalty, the shocking truth discovered inside reveals the cat wasn't just waiting for kindness, but protecting a final desperate message hidden in plain sight. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to uncover the secret. Give this a like if you love heartwarming mysteries and listen to the full story. The musty smell of unopened rooms and decaying paper hit David Miller as soon as he unlocked the deadbolt. He'd been dreading this. Clearing out the house of an uncle he barely knew, a man universally described as reclusive and cantankerous, Silas Blackwood. Even the name sounded like something from a bygone era. David, a pragmatic software salesman from Chicago, just wanted to liquidate the assets and get back to his life. He stepped inside, dust motes dancing in the slivers of light, piercing the grimy windows. The silence was oppressive. He made his way through the gloomy living room, furnished with heavy dark wood pieces draped in white sheets like patient ghosts. His goal was the small room at the back Silas had apparently used as a study, presumably where any important documents would be. He reached the study door. It was closed and, surprisingly, locked. Strange. He fumbled with the set of keys the estate lawyer had given him, finally finding one that turned the old lock with a protesting screech. He pushed the door open and stopped dead, a prickle of unease running down his spine. The room was small, cluttered with books and stacks of papers. A heavy oak desk dominated one wall. But it wasn't the clutter that froze him. It was the cat. An orange tabby, lean and clearly astray by its slightly rough coat, sat calmly in the center of the room, perched atop a stack of files on the floor beside the desk. It blinked slowly at David, utterly unfazed. How in God's name had a cat gotten into a locked room in a sealed house? He hadn't seen it slip past him at the front door. The windows were shut tight, coated with years of grime. More unsettling still, the papers beneath the cat looked disturbed, not messy, but as if someone or something had been deliberately nudging them. A single sheet lay partially separated from a folder, revealing neat, handwritten script. The cat let out a soft, almost questioning murr and didn't move. David stared, the silence amplifying the impossibility of the scene. This wasn't just a stray seeking shelter. Something else was going on here. What was this cat doing, and how did it get in? The task of clearing the house suddenly felt a lot more complicated and unexpectedly creepy. Elm Street was the kind of quiet, tree-lined avenue found in countless small American towns. Houses set comfortably back from the road, lawns, mostly neat lives lived behind drawn curtains. Silas Blackwood, occupant of number 112, had been an enigma. He'd lived there for over 30 years, since retiring from some anonymous accounting job, rarely seen, rarely spoken to. Polite nods were exchanged, but no one really knew him. His sudden death from a heart attack a week prior had caused ripples of curiosity more than grief. He had no close family. Only David, the son of a cousin, Silas hadn't spoken to in decades. Across the street, Martha Gable, a widow in her 70s, with kind eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of neighborhood happenings, had been the first to notice the orange cat. A day or two after Silas's body was removed, the tabby just appeared. It sat sentinel on the porch of number 112, staring intently at the front door. Rain or shine, it was there. Martha, a lifelong animal lover, felt a pang of sympathy. She knew Silas hadn't encouraged strays. Quite the opposite. She'd seen him shoo critters away irritably. Yet this cat waited with unwavering devotion. She'd left out food and water, which the cat eventually cautiously accepted, but it never strayed far from the door. Its vigil became a quiet neighborhood puzzle. David Miller arrived from Chicago with a suitcase and a headache. His relationship with Silas was non-existent, defined only by curt, infrequent birthday cards containing $5 bills when he was a kid. He viewed this trip as a necessary chore: secure the house, hire an estate agent, sell everything, settle debts, and hopefully inherit something for his trouble. He was vaguely aware he was the sole heir. He checked into a local motel planning to spend a few days assessing the situation. His first visit to the house was met by Mrs. Gable, who intercepted him on the sidewalk, eager to share the story of the waiting cat. David listened impatiently, dismissing it internally, probably just associating the house with a handout. He mumbled, trying to be polite. Uncle Silas wasn't exactly an animal person. He unlocked the front door, deliberately ignoring the orange cat that watched him from the porch steps with unnerving stillness. He stepped inside, making sure the door latched firmly behind him. That's when he proceeded to the study, expecting only dusty files. Finding the cat inside the locked room beside those disturbed papers shifted everything. It wasn't just a stray waiting outside anymore. It was inside, in a secured room. This wasn't just sentimentality. It was physically inexplicable. How and why that room, those papers? The pragmatic task of clearing the house instantly transformed. David felt a grudging curiosity mixed with his unease. He had to understand this. What secret was his reclusive uncle hiding, and how was this silent orange feline involved? His inciting incident wasn't just arriving. It was the moment he found the cat where it absolutely shouldn't be, forcing him to confront the possibility that Uncle Silas and his death and his house held more mysteries than he'd ever imagined. He carefully shut the study door again, leaving the cat inside for the moment, needing time to process the sheer strangeness of it all. David decided the first order of business was a thorough search, starting with the study. He cautiously reopened the door. The orange cat, whom he mentally started calling Rusty, due to its color, remained on the stack of files, grooming a paw with nonchalant elegance. David ignored it for the moment, focusing on the desk. It was meticulously organized, a lifetime of fiscal prudence evident in the neat ledgers and bundled receipts. Yet the files Rusty sat on seemed different, less formal, containing clippings, personal notes, even some pamphlets from animal shelters, and the single sheet that had caught his eye. It was a handwritten list of recurring monthly payments to something called the Willow Creek Sanctuary. Significant amounts. This didn't fit the profile of the miserly Uncle David, vaguely remembered. He spent the next few days sorting through the house, boxing up unremarkable belongings, appraising furniture. Rusty became his silent shadow. Every time David turned around, the cat seemed to be there, watching him with intelligent amber eyes. When David let him out, the cat clearly knew how to signal its needs at the back door. Rusty would circle the house and reappear at the front porch, waiting patiently to be let back in, always heading towards the study if allowed. His presence didn't go unnoticed. Arthur Finch, The neighborhood curmudgeon from 2 doors down saw David letting the cat in and stormed over Finch. A portly man with a perpetually sour expression jabbed a finger towards Rusty, who was now sunning himself on the study windowsill. David had opened it slightly for ventilation. "You letting that mangy thing in the house?" Finch sputtered. Silas would roll over in his grave. That man hated pests. It probably carries diseases. You need to call Animal Control Miller before it infests the whole neighborhood. David, already stressed, managed a non-committal reply. But Finch's hostility added another layer of complication. Mrs. Gable thankfully offered a counterpoint. She brought over a casserole. "You can't live on motel food, dear," and shared more observations Silas kept to himself. She admitted, "But I sometimes saw him late at night putting a little bowl out on the back step. Just occasionally, I thought maybe I imagined it." She also mentioned seeing the orange cat dart away from Silas's back door a few times over the past year, as if it knew it shouldn't be seen. Her insights painted a more nuanced picture, suggesting a hidden softness beneath Silas's gruff exterior. The call to animal control eventually happened. Likely initiated by Finch Officer Henderson, arrived stern and efficient. Rusty, however, proved uncannily elusive, vanishing into the overgrown backyard shrubbery the moment the official vehicle appeared. Henderson issued a warning. If the cat continued to be a nuisance, he'd have to set traps. The threat put David on edge. He was starting to feel a strange, grudging protectiveness towards the silent feline. Inside the house, David discovered more anomalies. Hidden in a kitchen cupboard behind dusty preserves were high-quality cat food tins and a specific type of feline joint supplement. In the study, tucked away on a bottom shelf, he found several well-read books on feline behavior and health. Why would Silas have these? And Rusty seemed strangely familiar with the house's layout, navigating it with quiet confidence, always drawn back to the study, often settling near the large, cold fireplace. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through a box of old photographs in the study, David found a faded snapshot tucked inside a book. It showed a much younger Silas, smiling faintly with a different orange cat on his lap. A cat that looked remarkably similar to Rusty. Could this be the key? Was Rusty a descendant or simply a reminder? The questions deepened. Rusty hopped onto the desk, nudged the photo with his nose, then looked pointedly towards the stone hearth of the fireplace before settling back onto his pile of files. David stared at the fireplace, then back at the cat. Was it trying to tell him something? The idea felt absurd, yet the cat's actions seemed too deliberate to be random. The tension wasn't just about clearing the house anymore. It was about deciphering a silent communication protecting a mysterious feline and uncovering the truth about a man nobody truly knew, all while dodging a grumpy neighbor and an animal control officer. The cat's persistent focus on the study, particularly the area around the fireplace, gnawed at David. He'd initially dismissed it, but the discovery of the old photos, Silas's hidden supplies, the animal behavior books, and Rusty's uncanny presence inside the locked room forced him to reconsider. What had Silas been hiding, and why did this cat seem so invested in it? Driven by a mixture of frustration, curiosity, and a growing sense that honoring his uncle meant understanding these secrets, David decided to investigate the study more thoroughly, especially the hearth. He started by examining the fireplace itself. It was old brick-lined, clearly unused for years, filled with dusty fake logs. He tapped along the stone mantelpiece and the surrounding bricks, listening for hollow sounds. Nothing. He checked the chimney flue, blocked solid with debris. He ran his hands along the raised hearthstones, feeling for looseness. Again, nothing obvious. Rusty watched him from the armchair. Silas must have favored, judging by the slight indentation and a few stray orange hairs occasionally letting out a soft chirp as if offering encouragement or critique. Discouraged, David sat back on his heels, looking at the files Rusty had first claimed. He picked up the folder containing the Willow Creek Sanctuary payment records again. Tucked inside, he found something he'd missed before a small folded note in Silas's precise hand. It read, "For David, should the inevitable happen, not all value is monetary. True loyalty secures more than wealth. The key rests where loyalty made its bed. Trust the sentinel." David's breath hitched. The key rests where loyalty made its bed. Trust the sentinel. Sentinel. Was that Silas's name for the cat and loyalty? The cat's unwavering vigil made its bed. David looked at Rusty now, curled comfortably on the worn armchair. Was the key in the chair? He started meticulously examining the old piece of furniture, feeling under the cushion, checking seams, tipping it over to look underneath. He found nothing but dust bunnies and a few old pennies. He reread the note, where loyalty made its bed. Maybe not the chair itself, but where the cat chose to rest most often. He thought about Rusty's habits over the past few days. The cat moved around, but it consistently returned to the study, often settling near the fireplace, sometimes on the chair, sometimes on the files, but also frequently on the worn braided rug directly in front of the hearth. David knelt on the rug, Rusty immediately hopping down to supervise rubbing against his leg. He ran his hands over the thick faded wool. Nothing. Then he examined the floorboards beneath the rug's edge near the hearth stones. Most were tightly fitted dark with age, but one right near the corner where the rug usually lay felt slightly different when he pressed down. It had a subtle give. His heart rate quickened. Using the edge of his pocket knife, he carefully worked at the seam. The wood groaned faintly. He managed to pry the edge up just enough to see a small, dark cavity beneath. At that moment, he heard a sharp rapping at the study window. He jumped, startled, spinning around. Arthur Finch stood outside on the lawn, peering in his face, contorted with suspicion. "What are you doing in there, Miller?" Finch called out, his voice muffled by the glass. "Thought I saw you messing with the fireplace. You find something Silas owed me?" David quickly dropped the floorboard back into place, standing up, trying to appear casual. He knew instinctively that whatever was under that board was important, and Finch's sudden appearance felt predatory. This was the turning point. He wasn't just sorting possessions anymore. He was actively searching for a hidden key, guided by a cat and a cryptic note, potentially protecting something valuable from a nosy, possibly greedy neighbor. He had crossed a line from detached nephew to reluctant detective. He had to find that key, understand its purpose, and protect Rusty, the sentinel, from Finch and Henderson. The simple task of settling an estate had become a mission. The confrontation with Finch, brief as it was, solidified David's resolve and heightened his sense of urgency. Finch was snooping suspicious. David needed to retrieve whatever was under that floorboard, and soon he shooed Finch away from the window with a vague excuse about checking the chimney's integrity, then drew the dusty curtains, plunging the study into deeper gloom. He felt a growing unease, the feeling of being watched intensifying. He knew he couldn't risk prying the board open again immediately, not with Finch potentially lurking outside. He needed a plan. His priority shifted: secure Rusty and uncover the secret before Finch or Henderson intervened decisively. He spent the rest of the day pretending to continue sorting boxes, deliberately making noise in other parts of the house while his mind raced. He reinforced the back door lock and made sure all windows were securely fastened. He observed Rusty closely. The cat seemed to understand the shift in atmosphere, staying closer to David, its usual calmness replaced by a low, almost imperceptible alertness. It still spent hours near the fireplace, often pointedly tapping the loose floorboard with its paw before settling down on the rug above it. The message couldn't be clearer. David's internal conflict raged. Part of him, the pragmatic salesman, screamed at the absurdity of it all, taking clues from a cat hiding from a neighbor, delaying the lucrative house sale over a potential wild goose chase. What if there was nothing under the board? What if Finch was just a harmless busybody? But the other part, the part awakened by the mystery, by Rusty's unwavering loyalty, by the hints of his uncle's hidden life, couldn't let it go. He thought of the photo of young Silas with the first orange cat, the quiet donations, the cryptic note. There was something here. He owed it to Silas, and maybe even to himself, to see it through. This strange inheritance wasn't just about property. It felt like a test. He decided to act under the cover of darkness, waiting until well after midnight, when Elm Street was asleep. David returned to the study. He worked by the dim light of his phone's flashlight. Rusty, a silent orange presence beside him. Carefully, quietly, he pried up the loose floorboard again. His fingers brushed against something small, cold, and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a small, old-fashioned brass key attached to a simple leather fob. Engraved on the fob was a single letter B, presumably for Blackwood, or perhaps the bank. Relief washed over him quickly, followed by adrenaline. He had the key. Now what? The note mentioned a bank, but which one? Silas's papers showed accounts at 2 local institutions. He'd have to check both. He carefully replaced the floorboard, making sure it looked undisturbed. Just as he stood up pocketing the key, he heard it. A distinct scraping sound at the back door, followed by a low mutter. Finch, or someone else. David froze, heart pounding. Rusty flattened himself on the rug, ears twitching, utterly silent. David crept towards the back of the house, peering through a gap in the kitchen curtains. He saw a shadowy figure fiddling with the lock. Finch. Just as he suspected, the man was trying to break in. David weighed his options. Confront him. Call the police. Finch was trespassing, clearly motivated by avarice. David felt a surge of anger, protectiveness over his uncle's legacy. However strange it was, before he could decide, another sound pierced the night. The unmistakable rumble of Henderson's animal control truck pulling up out front. Its headlights swept across the front windows. The noise startled Finch, who abandoned the lock and scurried back towards his own property. But Henderson hadn't come for Finch. He emerged from the truck holding a large wire trap. He'd come back for Rusty, likely prompted by another complaint from Finch. David was caught between Finch's greed, Henderson's determination, and the secret held by the key in his pocket. Rusty let out a low hiss from the study. The situation was escalating rapidly. He needed to secure Rusty's deal with Henderson and get to the bank, all while keeping Finch at bay. The final pieces were falling into place, hurtling towards a confrontation. He took a deep breath, the brass key feeling heavy in his hand. It was time to act decisively. Headlights cut across the living room, As Henderson walked towards the porch trap in hand, David knew he had moments. He quickly moved to the front door, opening it before Henderson could knock. Rusty stayed prudently hidden in the study. "Officer Henderson," David said, trying to sound calm and in control. "Evening. Is there a problem?" Henderson looked slightly surprised to see him awake. "Mr. Miller received another complaint about the stray. Regulations require me to set a trap if it's becoming a recurring nuisance." He gestured towards the porch where Rusty usually sat. "About that," David said, stepping out onto the porch, blocking Henderson's view inside. "He's not exactly a stray anymore. I've decided to take responsibility for him." This was a spur-of-the-moment decision born of the night's events, but it felt right. Henderson raised an eyebrow. "You're adopting him, sir. He needs vet checks registration." Before David could elaborate, Finch reappeared, emerging from the shadows between the houses, his face flushed with indignation. "Don't listen to him, officer. He's hiding something. I saw him tearing up the fireplace, probably found Silas's hidden money, and that cat—" "Mr. Finch, this is official town business," Henderson said sternly, turning towards the neighbor. "Please step back. He found something, I tell you." Finch insisted, stepping onto the lawn, eyes fixed on David. "Silas owed me from years ago. Whatever you found belongs to me." The accusation hung in the tense night air. David felt cornered. Just then, a porch light flicked on across the street. Mrs. Gable stepped out, wrapped in a housecoat. "Arthur Finch, what on earth are you doing harassing Mr. Miller at this hour?" she called out, her voice surprisingly firm. "And leave that poor cat alone. Silas would be ashamed of you." Finch, momentarily flustered by Mrs. Gable's intervention, sputtered indignantly. Seeing his chance, David addressed Henderson quickly. "Officer, Mr. Finch is mistaken. I'm the executor of my uncle's estate. I was simply inspecting the property's condition. As for the cat—" He glanced towards Mrs. Gable, making eye contact. "Mrs. Gable has kindly offered to provide temporary foster care until I can make permanent arrangements and get him fully vetted tomorrow. He won't be a nuisance." Mrs. Gable, catching on instantly, nodded vigorously. "That's right, officer. The poor dear needs a proper home. He'll be safe with me tonight." Henderson looked from David to Finch to Mrs. Gable. Sensing the neighborhood drama was beyond his mandate for trapping a stray, and with a temporary solution offered, he relented. "All right, Mr. Miller, Mrs. Gable, but I expect this situation to be resolved legally and promptly." He gave Finch a warning look, picked up his trap, and retreated to his truck. Finch, thwarted and outnumbered, glared at David before stomping back to his own house, muttering under his breath. David quickly went inside, gently coaxed a trusting Rusty into a cardboard box with a towel, and carried him across the street to a grateful Mrs. Gable, the brass key secure in his pocket. The immediate crisis was averted. The next morning, David visited both local banks. The key opened a safety deposit box. At the second one, Spring Valley Savings and Loan. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, were several documents and a thick envelope. The documents included a professionally drafted revised last will and testament notarized just 6 months prior. It left a modest sum to David, enough to cover his expenses and time, far less than he'd initially hoped for. But the bulk of Silas Blackwood's surprisingly substantial estate was bequeathed to the Willow Creek Sanctuary. Crucially, the will also established a generous trust fund specifically for the lifelong care of my companion Rusty, naming Martha Gable as the preferred trustee and caregiver. Should she be willing, the thick envelope contained personal letters. In his precise script, Silas explained his reclusive nature stemming from deep betrayals earlier in life that made him wary of people. He wrote about finding the first orange cat years ago, its simple loyalty, healing old wounds, and his quiet grief when it passed. Finding Rusty, a near-identical stray appearing years later, felt like a second chance. He detailed how he secretly cared for Rusty, earning the cat's trust, letting him into the house through a loose basement window, grating only Rusty knew about, explaining the cat's presence in the locked study. He mentioned Finch only briefly noting an old unpaid gambling debt. Finch constantly exaggerated, confirming David's suspicion of his motives. Silas expressed hope that David would be honorable enough to execute his final wishes, especially regarding Rusty and the sanctuary. He ended the letter simply, "Loyalty, I found, is the rarest and most valuable currency. Treasure it." David sat in the bank's quiet viewing room, the letters and the will spread before him, feeling a profound mix of emotions: surprise, humility, and a strange sense of connection to the uncle he never knew. His initial mercenary motives felt shallow now. He contacted the estate lawyer, immediately providing the new will. He met with Mrs. Gable, explaining the trust fund and Silas's wishes. She tearfully accepted the responsibility, assuring David that Rusty had already made himself quite at home. David spent a few more days overseeing the initial handover to the estate lawyer and ensuring the sanctuary was contacted. He saw Finch watching him from his window, but ignored him. The will was ironclad. Before leaving town, he visited Mrs. Gable one last time. Rusty, sleek and content, purred loudly on her lap, looking completely different from the anxious stray on Silas's porch. He reached out and scratched the cat behind the ears, receiving a gentle headbutt in return. Driving back to Chicago, David felt lighter. He hadn't gained a windfall, but he'd uncovered the truth, honored his uncle's real legacy, and played a part in securing a future for a loyal feline sentinel. He had learned, as Silas wrote, the value of loyalty and the quiet impact of hidden kindness. Elm Street seemed less ordinary now, touched by the silent bond between a reclusive man and the orange cat who guarded his secrets.
Scrap collector discovers sick orange cat in old warehouse. What happens next leaves neighborhood silent. The silence where a heartbeat should have been was the most deafening sound Marigold had ever known. Deep within the fragrant, shadowed recesses of the hayloft belonging to the Miller farm, the nest she had meticulously prepared lay tragically still. Only yesterday, it had held the single precious focus of her entire being, a tiny, dark-furred kitten, her firstborn, whose brief struggling breaths had filled her world. Now there was only the cloying scent of milk she couldn't give, and the profound instinctual agony of loss. Marigold was a creature of the in-between places, not truly feral, yet never fully domesticated. She was an orange tabby patched with white, possessing the lean, wary grace of a survivor. For several seasons, she had haunted the edges of the Miller farm in rural Pennsylvania, near the foothills where farmland slowly surrendered to dense, state-owned forest. Young Billy Miller sometimes left food out for her by the barn, and his mother tolerated her presence as long as she kept the mice down. Marigold accepted these offerings with cautious gratitude but maintained her independence, her true home, the fields, the hedgerows, and the shadowed woods that bordered the property. This spring, driven by ancient rhythms, she had sought out the quiet seclusion of the dusty hayloft to give birth. The single kitten arrived small, weak, its cries thin and reedy. Marigold had poured all her energy into nurturing it, licking it vigorously, curling her body tightly around its frail form, urging it to nurse with frantic intensity. But some vital spark was missing. By the second dawn, the tiny body lay cold and still beneath her frantic ministrations. The grief that followed was a physical force. It hollowed her out, leaving behind a restless, aching void. Her maternal hormones surged with nowhere to go, fueling a desperate energy that wouldn't let her settle. She paced the barn, emitting low, plaintive cries that echoed unanswered among the rafters. She returned compulsively to the empty nest, sniffing, rearranging the hay, her body trembling with confusion and sorrow. The familiar scent of the barn, usually a place of safety and potential prey, now felt suffocating, haunted by the ghost of the life that had barely begun. The Millers noticed her distress. Billy tried to coax her with extra food, his young face puckered with concern. "What's wrong, Marmee?" he'd ask softly, his name for her, though she rarely responded to it. But Marigold ignored the offerings, her internal turmoil too great. She needed to move, to search, though she knew not for what. The instinct to protect, to nurture, was a powerful current with no outlet, leaving her agitated and lost. Her restless pacing eventually led her away from the familiar territory of the farmyard. Driven by an urge she couldn't comprehend, she slipped through the sagging fence line at the back pasture and headed towards the dense woods that climbed the nearby ridges. She knew these woods, hunted their edges, but rarely ventured deep within. Today, however, the familiar boundaries felt meaningless. She moved through the undergrowth, driven not by hunger, but by that hollow ache, that searching instinct. The woods were awakening with the sounds and scents of late spring. Birdsong trilled overhead, squirrels chattered in the branches, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth, pine needles, and blooming mountain laurel. But Marigold took no notice of the burgeoning life around her. Her senses were turned inward, consumed by the silence left by her kitten's death. She trotted along barely visible deer trails, her orange coat a fleeting flash against the greens and browns of the forest floor, her mournful cries occasionally punctuating the natural symphony. She wandered for hours, driven by that aimless, agonizing energy. Deeper into the woods than she had ever gone before, she stumbled into a clearing overgrown with weeds and dominated by the skeletal remains of a long-abandoned hunter's shack or shed. The roof had mostly collapsed. The walls were leaning precariously, and vines snaked through the broken window frames. It smelled of decay, damp wood, and animal musk. Normally, Marigold would have skirted such a place, wary of potential predators or territorial occupants. But today, exhausted and still seeking refuge, the dark opening under a partially collapsed wall offered a sliver of perceived security, a place to hide from her own restless sorrow. She crept inside, the silence within the crumbling structure a temporary balm to her frayed nerves, and curled up on a pile of dry, rotting leaves in the dimmest corner, finally succumbing to a fitful, uneasy sleep. Marigold awoke some time later, not to the familiar sounds of the farm, but to the deeper quiet of the woods, punctuated by the drip of moisture from the dilapidated shed roof. The gnawing ache of her loss returned instantly, a physical weight in her belly. But beneath her own sorrow, another sound pricked her ears, faint, high-pitched, and rhythmic. Whimpering. She lifted her head, alert, scanning the dim interior of the shed. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was here, within these crumbling walls. It was the sound of young, helpless creatures. Her first confused thought was, kittens? Had she somehow found another litter? Was this some strange echo of her own loss? She rose silently, stretching her cramped limbs, and followed the sound cautiously towards the opposite corner of the shed. There, pushed against the damp, mossy foundation stones, was a sodden cardboard box, its sides sagging. The whimpering emanated from within. Marigold approached with extreme caution, her body low, tail twitching nervously. She sniffed at the edge of the box. The scent was wrong, not feline but distinctly canine, overlaid with the sharp tang of urine and the cold scent of fear. Peering over the edge, she saw them. 3 tiny puppies, huddled together for warmth on the dirty cardboard. They were small, perhaps terrier mixes, their fur a mixture of tan and black, sparse and damp. Their eyes were open but unfocused, suggesting they were maybe 2 weeks old, past the newborn stage but still utterly dependent. They squirmed feebly, their whimpers weak but persistent, calls for a mother who wasn't there. Someone had dumped them here, likely under the cover of darkness, leaving them to fate in this isolated, decaying structure. They were cold, hungry, and terrified. Marigold stared, a complex brew of instinct and confusion swirling within her. These were not her kittens. They were fundamentally other. Yet, the sound of their distress, their sheer vulnerability, resonated powerfully with the maternal hormones still coursing through her system. The urge to nurture, so cruelly thwarted just days before, surged again, overriding species recognition. She let out a low, questioning chirp, then tentatively reached her head into the box. One of the puppies, the largest of the 3, managed a slightly stronger whimper and nudged blindly towards her face. That fragile contact seemed to solidify Marigold's confused purpose. She stepped carefully into the box, her paws sinking slightly into the damp cardboard. The puppies immediately sensed her body heat and began squirming towards her, their whimpering intensifying slightly, seeking the comfort and sustenance she couldn't truly provide. Marigold began to lick them, her rough tongue surprisingly gentle. She cleaned their soiled fur, nudged them closer together, her purr starting as a low, uncertain rumble before gaining strength, vibrating through the cramped space. She meticulously tended to each puppy, driven by an instinct that demanded she clean, warm, and protect these helpless lives, regardless of their alien scent. Once they were slightly cleaner, and had quieted somewhat under her ministrations, she carefully curled her body around them, pulling them close against her belly, sharing her warmth. The puppies burrowed against her, sighing, their whimpers finally subsiding into the occasional sleepy twitch or soft grunt. Marigold lay there, the unfamiliar weight and smell of the puppies a strange reality. The frantic searching in her own heart eased, replaced by an immediate demanding focus. She couldn't feed them, she couldn't truly replace their mother, but she could offer warmth, cleanliness, and protection in this cold, damp place. She closed her eyes, not resting, but listening intently to the small sounds of life nestled against her, guarding her unlikely, adopted brood against the silence of the woods and the unknown dangers lurking beyond the shed's crumbling walls. Her own grief was still a palpable ache, but now it was intertwined with a fierce, albeit confused, sense of maternal duty. Maya Jensen wasn't supposed to be this deep in the state forest, especially not near the old hemlock trail that locals generally avoided due to washouts and fallen trees. But at 15, the thrill of exploring off-limits territory was often more compelling than sticking to the well-maintained paths closer to town. She moved through the woods with the confidence of someone who had spent her childhood scrambling over rocks and following deer trails, her sturdy hiking boots making quick work of the uneven ground, a well-worn bird identification guide sticking out of her backpack pocket. She was hoping to spot a pileated woodpecker she'd heard drumming in this area last week. The crumbling hunter's shed was a local legend among kids in town, rumored to be haunted or a place where hermits once lived. Maya knew it was likely just an abandoned structure, but its isolation still held a certain allure. As she pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel near the clearing where it stood, she heard sounds that immediately stopped her in her tracks. Not the drumming woodpecker she sought, but faint, high-pitched whimpering, interspersed with the low, rumbling purr of a cat. Intrigued and slightly puzzled, Maya approached the shed quietly, peering through a gap in the warped plank walls. The dim interior took a moment for her eyes to adjust. Then she saw them. An orange and white cat, one she vaguely recognized seeing sometimes near the Miller farm on the edge of town, was curled protectively in a dilapidated cardboard box, and nestled against the cat were puppies, tiny ones, squirming slightly. The cat was meticulously licking one of them, purring loudly. Maya stared, her initial surprise quickly turning to concern. She knew enough about animals from growing up in the country to recognize that this scene, while strangely touching, was also deeply precarious. The puppies looked incredibly young, far too young to be without their mother's milk. The cat, clearly acting as a surrogate, couldn't possibly be feeding them. They were whimpering not just for comfort, but likely from hunger and cold. How long had they been here? She watched for several minutes, hidden from view. The cat, Marigold, seemed completely devoted, nudging the puppies, washing them, keeping them warm. But Maya could see the faint tremor in one of the smaller pups' bodies, the listless way another lay almost still. They needed help, fast. Her first thought was animal control, but the county service was notoriously underfunded and slow to respond, especially for calls deep in the state forest. A local shelter? Possible. But getting the animals there safely, especially the protective mother cat, seemed daunting for her alone. Then she thought of Mrs. Ainsworth. Eleanor Ainsworth lived just over the ridge, maybe a mile's walk through the woods from here. She was an elderly widow who kept mostly to herself, but Maya knew her from volunteering occasionally at the town library where Mrs. Ainsworth was a regular patron. Mrs. Ainsworth was known for her quiet kindness, her beautiful garden, and her soft spot for any creature in need. Years ago, Maya's own family dog had been injured by a porcupine, and Mrs. Ainsworth had calmly helped her frantic parents remove the quills, her gentle confidence soothing both dog and owners. Everyone in town knew that if you found an injured bird or a lost kitten, Mrs. Ainsworth was the person to call. Maybe, just maybe, she could help now. Making a quick decision, Maya backed away from the shed slowly, careful not to disturb the scene further. She marked the spot mentally, then turned and half ran, half hiked back through the woods towards Mrs. Ainsworth's tidy farmhouse, nestled in a small clearing overlooking the valley. She arrived breathless at the back porch, knocking urgently. After a moment, the door opened and Eleanor Ainsworth stood there, wiping her hands on a floral apron, her silver hair neatly pinned, her expression calm but questioning. "Maya? Goodness, child, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," Mrs. Ainsworth said, her voice gentle. Gasping slightly for breath, Maya quickly explained what she had found: the abandoned shed, the orange cat from the Miller place, the tiny, whimpering puppies, her fear that they wouldn't survive much longer. "The cat's trying, Mrs. Ainsworth, she really is," Maya rushed on, "but she can't feed them. They look so weak, I didn't know who else to call." Mrs. Ainsworth listened intently, her kind blue eyes clouding with concern. She asked Maya a few specific questions. How big were the puppies? Were their eyes open? Did they seem cold? She knew immediately the gravity of the situation. Newborn or near-newborn pups needed constant warmth and nourishment. Their own mother, let alone a cat, couldn't fully replicate in these conditions. "You did the right thing coming here, Maya," Mrs. Ainsworth said calmly, already untying her apron. "Show me where they are. We'll need a warm basket, some old towels, and I'd better call Dr. Chen on the way. Let him know what we might be bringing in." Mrs. Ainsworth moved with a quiet efficiency that belied her age. Within minutes, armed with a towel-lined laundry basket, and after a quick call to the town's veterinarian explaining the potential emergency, she was following Maya back through the woods towards the crumbling shed. Her heart felt heavy with apprehension for the tiny lives hanging in the balance, but also with a familiar, stirring empathy for the maternal cat trying so desperately against impossible odds, and for the unknown circumstances that led to such a cruel abandonment. She only hoped they weren't already too late. Reaching the dilapidated shed, Eleanor Ainsworth moved with the same quiet caution Maya had employed. Peering inside, she saw the scene exactly as Maya described. Marigold, the orange cat, was curled tightly around the three small puppies, her body radiating a fierce, protective warmth. The puppies were whimpering faintly, nuzzling against her, but their movements seemed sluggish, their tiny bodies looking terribly fragile against the rough cardboard. One, the smallest, was barely moving at all. "Oh, the poor dears," Eleanor murmured, her voice soft and soothing. "And you, brave girl," she added, directing her words gently towards Marigold. "You've done your best, haven't you?" Marigold flattened her ears slightly at their presence but didn't hiss or growl, perhaps sensing Eleanor's calm energy or simply too focused on her charges. Eleanor knelt slowly near the box, letting Marigold sniff her outstretched hand. "We need to help them, Mama," she said quietly. "They need proper food and more warmth than even you can give right now." Working together, Eleanor and Maya carefully transferred the puppies into the warm, towel-lined basket Eleanor had brought. They were shockingly small and felt cool despite Marigold's efforts. Eleanor tucked another towel gently around them. Marigold watched the process with anxious, wide eyes, letting out distressed meows. "It's all right," Eleanor reassured her. "You come too. Come with your babies." She held the basket low, allowing Marigold to peer inside. After a moment of hesitation, torn between fear and her protective instincts, Marigold seemed to make a decision. As Eleanor and Maya carefully lifted the basket to carry it out of the shed, Marigold followed close behind, darting anxious glances towards the basket, clearly unwilling to be separated from her adopted litter. The walk back to Eleanor's farmhouse felt urgent. Once inside the warm, tidy kitchen, Eleanor immediately set to work. She placed the basket near the gentle warmth of the old wood-burning stove, kept low even in spring for residual heat, tucking hot water bottles wrapped in yet more towels around the puppies. She examined the weakest pup. Its breathing was shallow, its body limp. Her heart sank. Dr. Chen arrived within the hour, a brisk, compassionate man with gentle hands. His assessment confirmed Eleanor's fears. The puppies were severely dehydrated and hypothermic, likely 2 weeks old, and the smallest one was fading quickly. "You probably saved the other two by finding them when you did, Maya," he said kindly, before turning his attention to Eleanor. "Bottle feeding, every 2 to 3 hours, around the clock. It's crucial. I'll leave you with formula and bottles. And keep that mama cat nearby," he added, nodding towards Marigold, who was now anxiously but quietly watching from under the kitchen table. Her presence, the grooming, the warmth, it all helps stimulate them and reduces stress, believe it or not. You've got quite the team here, Eleanor. Despite their best efforts, the smallest puppy didn't make it through the night. Eleanor held its tiny, still body for a long moment, her own quiet grief for past losses surfacing before burying it gently near her rose bushes. It steeled her resolve to save the remaining two. Thus began a period of intense, exhausting dedication. Eleanor's quiet, predictable routine vanished, replaced by the demanding schedule of neonatal care. Every 2 hours, day and night, she was warming formula, patiently coaxing tiny mouths to accept the bottle, gently stimulating them afterwards, cleaning their bedding. It was work that required constant vigilance and infinite patience, stirring memories of sleepless nights from her own much younger years, though under vastly different circumstances. She hadn't had children of her own, a quiet sorrow she rarely acknowledged, but she had helped raise nieces and nephews, cared for sick animals, understood the rhythms of nurturing. Through it all, Marigold was her constant shadow, her silent partner. The orange cat seemed to understand her role implicitly. When Eleanor took the puppies out to feed them, Marigold would watch intently, often reaching out to groom a puppy's head while it nursed from the bottle. As soon as the puppies were placed back in their warm basket, Marigold would curl around them possessively, purring loudly, meticulously washing their faces and bodies, her rough tongue a comforting, stimulating presence. She never showed aggression towards Eleanor's handling of the pups, only a quiet, anxious supervision, as if ensuring her adopted babies were receiving the best possible care. The two surviving puppies, both males, began to thrive. Eleanor named the slightly larger, more robust, tan and black one Rascal for his emerging boisterous nature, and the smaller, quieter black and tan one Scout for his watchful eyes. Under the dual care of woman and cat, they gained weight steadily. Their coats filled in, their movements became stronger and more coordinated. For Eleanor, the exhaustion was profound, but so was the sense of purpose. The oppressive silence of her empty house was replaced by the demanding squeaks of hungry puppies, the rumble of Marigold's purr, the rhythm of caregiving. Pouring her energy into these fragile lives eased the quiet ache of her own solitude in a way nothing else had. She found herself talking constantly, to the puppies as she fed them, to Marigold as they shared the vigil. She wasn't lonely anymore. She was needed. Marigold, too, seemed to heal. The frantic searching behavior disappeared, replaced by the focused calm of maternal duty. While she occasionally still sat by the window looking towards the woods, her gaze seemed less haunted, more peaceful. She had found beings to nurture, a purpose for her thwarted instincts. Her bond with the puppies was undeniable, a strange and beautiful interspecies connection forged in shared vulnerability and mutual need. As Rascal and Scout grew, graduating to lapping formula, then eating mush, then tumbling around a puppy-proofed section of the kitchen with boundless energy, Marigold remained their devoted guardian. She'd patiently endure their clumsy attempts to play with her tail, gently cuff them if they got too rough, and always curl up with them for naps, a furry orange anchor in their small world. Eleanor watched them, her heart full. This strange little family, brought together by loss, abandonment, and compassion, had filled her home and her life with unexpected warmth. She knew challenges lay ahead, finding homes for the puppies eventually, perhaps, deciding Marigold's future. But for now, she cherished the present. In the quiet Pennsylvania farmhouse, an elderly woman who thought her nurturing days were long past, and a grieving cat who became a mother against all odds, had found solace and purpose in saving each other and the two small lives entrusted to their unlikely care. The following weeks unfolded in a happy, chaotic rhythm dictated by puppy energy. Rascal, true to his name, was a bundle of fearless exploration, tumbling over his own paws in his haste to investigate every corner of Eleanor's kitchen and adjacent sunroom, which had become their designated territory. He'd pounce on dust bunnies with mock ferocity, chew enthusiastically on designated puppy toys, and often try to engage Marigold in rough-and-tumble play, usually earning himself a patient but firm restraining paw from his feline foster mother. Scout, while equally playful with his brother, remained the more observant one, often sitting back to watch the proceedings with his intelligent, soulful eyes before cautiously joining the fray. He developed a particular fondness for Eleanor, often trotting over to sit by her feet while she read, resting his chin trustingly on her shoe. Marigold navigated her role with remarkable grace. She was undeniably the puppy's primary source of comfort and non-human companionship. They sought her out constantly, piling onto her when she tried to nap, licking her face with puppy enthusiasm, following her around the room. She tolerated their boisterous energy with a patience that amazed Eleanor, grooming their ears meticulously, allowing them to snuggle close, her purr a constant backdrop to their playful yips. She even seemed to set boundaries. A low growl or a swift, clawless pat would usually halt overly rambunctious behavior instantly. Eleanor sometimes watched, fascinated, as Marigold would deliberately position herself between the puppies and the top step leading down into the main living room, effectively herding them back towards their safer zone, an instinctive act of protection that transcended species. Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in years. The puppy's clumsy antics, Marigold's maternal patience, the sheer unexpectedness of her current life, it all chipped away further at the quiet reserve that had defined her widowhood. Her home, once meticulously tidy and predictably silent, was now filled with the sounds of puppy paws skittering on the floor, the occasional yelp of surprise during play, and the soft thud of wagging tails against furniture. It wasn't always neat, but it felt undeniably alive. Maya, the teenager who had started it all, became a regular visitor, stopping by after school ostensibly to help Eleanor, but mostly just to delight in the puppies and marvel at Marigold. "They really think she's their mom, don't they?" Maya would whisper, watching Marigold patiently endure Rascal chewing on her tail. "In all the ways that matter most right now, I think they do," Eleanor would reply softly, smiling. Even Dr. Chen, during a follow-up check on the thriving puppies, shook his head in gentle amazement. "Never seen anything quite like it, Eleanor," he admitted, observing Marigold calmly watching him examine Scout. "That cat's dedication, it's remarkable. And you," he added, looking at Eleanor's brighter eyes and more animated demeanor, "this little menagerie seems to suit you." Eleanor knew the arrangement couldn't last forever in exactly this form. Puppies grew quickly, and Rascal and Scout would soon outgrow their kitchen domain and Marigold's ability to physically manage them. Thoughts of finding them permanent, loving homes occasionally surfaced, bringing a pang of anticipated sadness. But for now, she pushed those thoughts aside. For now, this unlikely family was whole. Each morning, waking to the sounds of life within her walls, watching Marigold's gentle grooming or the puppy's joyful play, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude. Grief had carved hollows within her, but compassion, first Marigold's instinctive nurturing, then her own dedicated response, had filled those spaces with unexpected warmth, purpose, and the simple, life-affirming joy of caring for others. The echo of silence had finally been replaced by the vibrant sounds of a family, however unconventional, thriving against the odds.